everyone. I'm Shoshana Mostoller. I am the Community Engagement Manager for the Chesapeake Humane Society, and I'm also going to be moderating this session. For those who have visual impairments, I am a middle-aged Caucasian woman with brown wavy hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing reading glasses and a sage green sweater. So if you're here, you are joining us for the office hours session called Live Feedback on Incorporating Trauma-Informed Design for People and Animals in Your Emergency Shelter. This is an office hours session designed to provide live feedback to emergency shelter providers regarding facility design, which accommodates both human and animals in the same place. The facilitators have been chosen based on their unique ability to address how design and the built environments can support recovery from trauma. Part 1 took place on day 1 of the conference and was dedicated to providing feedback that was specific to a co-sheltering site that is currently in the planning stages in Kitsap County, Washington. Today is part 2. It's an open format question and answer, so any provider can ask facility design questions and receive feedback from our design experts. So first, I'm going to introduce our 2 design experts that are joining us for these office hours. We have Dr. Jill Pable, who is a professor in the Interior Architecture and Design Department at Florida State University. She's also a fellow and past national president of the Interior Design Educators Council. She is an NCIDQ certified interior designer and a well-accredited professional. Her research focuses on the design of environments for people experiencing trauma, and she is the originator of the Design Resources for Homelessness Initiative, a research-informed nonprofit online information source for architectural designers and organizers creating environments for people who have experienced homelessness. She is the co-author of Sketching Interiors at the Speed of Thought and Interior Design Strategies for Teaching and Learning, and was included in the Design Intelligence list of 30 most admired design educators in the United States. She believes that design holds the potential to help people to be their best selves. Dr. Rebecca Stuntebeck joined the UC Davis Koret Shelter Medicine Program team as a facility design veterinarian in April of 2022. She obtained her DVM degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine in 2013. She completed a shelter medicine internship at the Dane County Humane Society via the KSMP team in 2014 and a shelter medicine residency with the UW Shelter Medicine Program in 2018. Achieving board certification through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners that fall. Becky has also worked as a shelter veterinarian at 2 private shelters in Wisconsin. In addition to facility design, her interests include proactive population management and infectious disease prevention, as well as building relationships with folks across the sheltering field. Outside of work, she enjoys petting kittens, going outside, and reading. She lives in Wisconsin with her husband, daughter daughter and 3 aging cats, and 1 rowdy puppy. So thank you for joining us, Jill and Becky. As I previously mentioned, this is an open Q&A format where providers can get their design challenges addressed in real time. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section of Woohova, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I'm going to start off with a question, and then I'm going to go see what's in our chat. So the first question I'm going to start with is for Jill. What are some of the highest impact and easiest to implement trauma-informed design choices that shelters have made that might impact both people and pets staying at a shelter or other type of housing facility?
Thanks for that great question. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Pable, and I am a Caucasian woman with longish gray hair. That is a very broad question, although a very good one. There are many things we can do to help ensure that a space is convenient, comforting, and fulfilling for people. Those things include broadly the volume of space, the width of corridors, the heights of ceilings, and so forth, which are more expensive things. There are also more local things we can do, which are more achievable with budget considerations, such as color palettes, material finishes. One of my favorites as an instructor of lighting is both expansive but also modest changes we can make to lighting, which are a huge perceptual impact on interior spaces and exterior spaces as well at night. So it's difficult to name a few of my favorites, but I would say they fall into those basic categories. There's also things we can do that you don't think about as much, even with regard of the arrangement of furniture, to promote a sense of collaboration, promote a sense of community and discussion with how we're arranging furniture, how we can make people feel at ease with where we're placing furniture, such as placing furniture with defensive backs so that nobody feels that others can sneak up on them, especially if some people have been accosted in the past in a violent way. So there are a lot of perceptual things that kind of fly under the radar of our consciousness that become very important. Things like how high are the ceilings? What are the acoustic conditions like? What are the things that we touch and feel? Are things able to be kept clean that we perceive are, being maintained properly? So that is by far a general answer, but we can talk about any of those things more in particulars if you're interested.
So I know I am interested because I have a specific room in our shelter. We have an animal welfare organization, and we have a specific room that we designed trying to be calming. And we put a lot of thought into that, but I'm wondering if people are trying to, from a design perspective, if people are trying to design a space that's comforting or makes people feel safe, what specific, are there specific colors? You had mentioned textures. I'm curious about some of the specifics, actually.
Yeah, sure. Well, it might be helpful to say that the things that people notice the fastest, and we might arguably say have a sizable impact, are both color and also lighting. Lighting in terms of, we talk about lighting being either sort of broad and all at the same level, or we talk about lighting being sort of textured, where there's pools and puddles of lighting. There are local lighting sources with table lamps or spotlights on beautiful artwork. So, we can think about the pattern of the lighting. Probably more calming would be things that we would associate more with residential lighting, sort of mood lighting, probably in the warmer tones that are not spotlighting people sitting, but are actually spotlighting the things around them, such as art or tables and so forth. In terms of color, it's very difficult to say that every instance of using the color yellow is not calming, because that's not true. It's really more sort of the landscape of the color palette that you develop along with the finishes that you include. Generally, people are very at ease with natural sorts of materials, stone, wood, things that we expect to see in nature, for example, if the pocketbook allows. Generally, what I try to stay away from, if a goal is to keep a space more calming, is any intense colors used in a very large place, such as an entire feature wall of a very saturated yellow or especially red, is not something I would promote, just because they do literally raise blood pressure and do, in fact, kind of sort of give a sense of activity and buzziness, which you may not want in that situation. So generally speaking, cooler colors, blues, purples, blues, purples, and greens and so forth are a good place to start, but I wouldn't just only stay with those. Pops of small, areas of yellow, red, and so forth are enlivening too. So again, I know that's a broad brushstroke answer, but that kind of touches on some of the things that immediately come to mind.
No, I mean, I think that's wonderful. We have one person who had said in the chat, talking about the arranging furniture and how helpful it can be to see all the entrances and exits, and also had mentioned low sensory environments. And so I don't know, do you have any thing that you'd like to add maybe about low sensory environments specifically?
Yeah, let me speak to that other issue too, and that was permeability, as we call it, in terms of seeing seeing the room around us. If the clients or the staff are in a place of being unsure or being in a place of uncertainty or caution, especially. We speak of spaces having a permeability, such as walls with glass on inside, so you can preview a room before you actually come into it. For example, I'm a big fan of that as as the main entrance to a space, because if you put yourself in the shoes of kind of coming into a space, you don't know if people are going to be sitting there watching you come in, and so forth. So having the ability to kind of preview and decide whether you want to come into a space before you actually do is a huge help to putting people more at ease. Shoshana, what was the other part of your question again?
Well, the other part was about low sensory environments. Let me go back because that was actually in the chat. It was a comment more than a question, just about low sensory environments being important. And so I just didn't know if you had anything specifically to add about about low sensory environments and what that would entail.
What I'd probably say about that is sort of allied to low sensory, and that is giving people, where appropriate, ability to control their environment. For example, some persons who may have experienced violence want nothing more to be able to go into a room and turn the lights down very low and just to be by themselves. And having the ability for somebody themselves to do that instead of asking others to have access to the light switch can be very, very ennobling and very promoting of people's dignity. In terms of low sensory environments, we can think about that in terms of multiple senses: acoustically, music or the absence of music, the presence of positive touch, the absence of negative touch elements such as cold metals, for example, can be very, very helpful. Since we're also talking about companion animals, Becky and I have been fascinated to see, as we compared notes, that sometimes some of these things actually are appealing to companion animals as well as people, which is kind of a comforting thought. So hopefully that helps a bit.
For sure. And actually, so that was one thing I was going to ask was, for Becky, if you wanted to chime in with the design aspect for the pets. And I don't know if that got touched on, a lot in the last session, but relating to making that environment welcoming for pets, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, kind of as we connect that question back to what Jill was just talking about in terms of our sensory perception of our environment. When I think about animals being in this space with people, I think about dogs barking and how problematic that can become potentially for people as well as any other animals in proximity. And so noise is something that is in the field of animal welfare, where there isn't a lot of evidence for a lot of the things we talk about. There is a lot of evidence that noise makes a big difference in the experience and the welfare of animals in animal shelters. So if you enter a dog ward where dogs are barking and barking and barking and it hurts your ears, literally, it's also hurting their ears. And so really being intentional about how noise is going to move through the space is going to be something that's going to be helpful when it comes to a co-sheltering facility. And then things that are likely to get a dog barking are similar to what Jill was just speaking to. A dog feeling like it can't control its environment, a dog feeling like it doesn't have choices, a dog experiencing unpredictable things in its environment are all going to contribute to a dog being noisy and being problematic in that sense. So it's sort of how you use the space to help the dog feel comfortable, and that will have benefits for everybody in the surroundings then.
Right, so connected. That makes so much sense. So there's a question for you, Becky. In yesterday's part 1, there was a short discussion about addressing behavioral issues in co-sheltering environments. Do you feel that access to virtual behavior assistance would be a viable way to assist pets and their human in this environment?
My simple and preliminary answer is yes. I think where I would just say proceed with caution is I know a lot of states have a lot of different rules with regard to veterinarians' ability to provide virtual veterinary care. And so when we cross into the behavioral realm, I just want to make sure that locally there aren't any regulations or anything that you'd need to be aware of in that regard. But I mean, getting behavior help is hard of any sort. So if what you can get is virtual assistance, go for it. Go for it. Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So another question that is in the chat, in the question and answer, is about placement of beds. So it says so much of an emergency shelter is about where people sleep. What is the best way to make a bed in a limited space around the bed trauma informed by design?
I can start with that. I'm sure Becky would have some things to say about this as well. The person who wrote it's a very insightful question, because in a shelter situation, one's bed is usually about the only private space somebody has in an entire shelter. And for that reason, it becomes very important to design it well to give that person the degree of control and comfort that is possible within that environment. So one thing I've done with design resources for homelessness is travel around the country and also over in Europe to see different approaches to this. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of different policies and a lot of different outcomes that result from those policies. I've seen everything from single person partial wall pods that give somebody autonomy to be around others in close proximity, but to have their own personal private space. I've seen pods of 4 to 10 people, which seek to build a sense of community. And then I've seen the other extreme of congregate living rooms with bunk beds of 40 to 60. Generally, I would say I think a positive progression is getting away from the 40 to 60 somewhat chaotic spaces, and bringing that down to something that's a little more cognitively graspable, if you will, and giving people a chance to get to know others around them. So, personally, I would recommend either the pod approach of, say, 6 to 10, especially if families are involved. And in certain instances where persons have experienced violence, for example, single pods are a really good idea too. Although they take more space, they can give somebody a sense of distance and a sense of peace of mind that, congregate living doesn't help. So it really depends on the population and their needs, I would say. There's tons I could talk about with regard to sleeping spaces. That's kind of an area I spend a lot of time in talking with various shelters that I work with in terms of privacy curtains, lighting that's controllable by the bed to read by, and most recently, Becky and I talking about the integration of companion animal safe spaces within that as well. So we can take that however you'd like to, but let me stop there and see if Becky wants to add some things.
I actually don't have a lot to add, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jill, but do you happen to have the pictures that you made for our presentation?
Yeah,
I think maybe we should pop those up and just maybe share those briefly for anyone who wasn't there, because I think they're really nice demonstrations of what might be possible.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Let me share the screen here. So this is an image from a larger report, and this was actually a case study I did of a women's shelter that happens to be located in Seattle, Washington. And what I really was taken by this was this sort of idea of bed pods. This was a population of women who were very, very cautious, having experienced violence in the past. And so this is what worked best for them. Just a very small pod, partial height walls. The walls are only 52 inches tall, no doors, but lockable storage and a single bed inside with lighting. If you want to see a picture of those, let me scroll down here a little bit, past some other things. By the way, this report is available for free download from the Design Resources for Resources website if you're interested. Come on. Here you can see a picture of these pods. You can see that they're partial height, and you might think, well, the women would want their own private apartments, but actually these women didn't. They wanted to know other people with similar situations were nearby. They wanted to hear them, be able to talk to them over the walls. Staff liked this because they could easily check on a resident because there's no doors present and so forth. So anyway, that seemed to be such a great solution for them. So kind of along those lines, I started thinking, based on a conversation with Becky, what would happen with that kind of thing if we also wanted to include companion animals? So these are just a couple of preliminary sketches. This has not been built anywhere. This is hot off the presses and certainly subject to your thoughts and criticism. I don't bruise easily. But here would be, for example, a pod made with partial height walls in a bigger space, of course, with 2 heights of beds, and then perhaps a safe enclosure for dogs. And then you also see this closable gate here that would allow the dog more roaming with their with their human companions if the situation permitted. We could also look at a similar situation if it was cat, 1 or 2 cats that knew each other and got along well with that same pod, as you see here. This keeps jumping around. There it is. So you can kind of see a cattery coming into focus in that top corner. It's also possible you could scale this idea up if policy and the population would benefit. Here's an example of my goodness, sorry, this just keeps jumping around. Here's an example of 6 humans with spaces for 3 dogs, again, with the gate, as you see here. And it could be possible with kind of a series of predictable components, as you see up here in the top right, beds of a couple of heights, couple of case pieces, if you will, and a couple of the companion animal pieces. So again, none of this has been tried. This is so new. But I know I've worked with some of these pieces before to great effect in some shelters. So I would love to hear if anybody has some thoughts about that.
Well, I just wanted to share that I think these designs that Jill made are a really elegant possibility to consider. I mean, I'm stepping outside my zone of expertise and saying this next thing, but I don't know how communities go about figuring out if they need a new sheltering facility, how many beds that facility should have given the scale of the need in their community and whatnot. But without a doubt, when you are going to try to honor the connections between humans and their pets by creating a co-sheltering facility, it's going to complexify the work of providing a safe, comfortable space for the animals and their people. And I think this pod design, which incorporates opportunities to confine animals in comfortable, reasonable, humane confinement situations, but also respects the need to balance. Like we've got to accommodate a certain number of people to make this work for our community. I think there's just a lot of great possibilities here.
I think there was some good conversation that started on the last session that, if something like this was contemplated, I think it would have to be offered in the context of some significant policy development about hours of when, such thing would be done, how long an animal is confined in various spaces, how to deal with, access for acoustic purposes, and maybe we sequester all of the cats in one room and all of the dogs in another room, for example. So there's like a lot of permutations of this.
Right.
Probably have to be thought through.
Absolutely.
That's such a great point. I've seen a a shelter where they did have like a specific room for cats and a specific room for dogs, versus something like this. And I think, what's interesting about this is it definitely requires the people who are living in that pod to have some discussions about, like you said, times of like when one dog will be out versus another, especially, depending on how the dogs all get along, or if there's cats. We know cats jump everywhere. So I think it's interesting though, and especially in terms of the rest of the shelter, like this is showing just the sleeping area, but like what space then is available for the dogs or the cats or the gerbils or whatever, what have you.
Right.
Other areas of the shelter so that they're not necessarily all in that one room at one time. And I don't know if that's something that was discussed already at the last, at the day one, but I think that's really interesting, a really interesting layout. So one question is kind of going back to the lighting and color, and it's so the question is, the person's curious to know if some of the trauma-informed design principles for human cross over to animals, specifically around lighting and color. And then I'm wondering also, I'm just going to add on to that person's question. I'm wondering also about scent, right? So like lots of times in shelters, we use pheromones or feel away, things like that. And I know, lots of times in people like lavender, or some people are sensitive to scents though. So I'm wondering if I can also maybe add something about scents in there as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in initially, and I'll just point out that Jill is our expert when it comes to the trauma-informed design for people, and I'm representing the animal expertise. And we don't necessarily, we're learning that we overlap, but we don't necessarily cross over. So that question of how much spillover between the light recommendations, I'll speak to what I know on the animal side, and maybe Jill can riff off of that. But what we believe to be true for animals in animal shelters is as much natural light as possible. So access to windows or solar light tubes, providing exposure to whatever's happening outside the building, are very good. When that's not possible, or in addition to that, we also want to respect natural circadian rhythms to the extent possible. So we don't want to leave the lights on in the facility all night. Dogs and cats and gerbils need to rest just like humans do, and light dark cycles are an important part of that. And maybe I'll hand it to you, Jill, to riff off of a little bit, and then I can speak to the sense a little bit for animals as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the circadian rhythm. This is an area of lighting research that we're just starting to crack open. And we're learning that, the cycles of light and dark with regard to our circadian rhythms is not just, something that leaves us irritable if it's not set up right. It literally is harmful to human health. Now, honestly, I cannot speak so much to the animal side of this. I'm glad Becky's here. But we've dealt with this in shelters before, to the point where we think about not only the presence, but the color of lighting specifically meant to act as night lights to guide people to the bathrooms. Generally speaking, you want to not use night lighting, which is in the blue spectrum. We talk about it in the nanometers as kind of the measuring part of that. 580 nanometers is what you want to avoid. So you generally want to have lighting that's on the redder tone that disrupts our sleep cycle less. So it's much beyond just kind of waking up when you don't want to, though. People who, for example, work the night shift and then have to adjust back to working the day shift, it's very harmful to their health. So lighting is a huge part of that, and so is daylighting. The presence of windows, ideally, is something that we want to think about, not only for, the vitamin D uptake, but also for the views. We want to think about, having a connection to the natural processes outside to the extent that building lets us.
Oh, that's
yes to all of that. I did also want to mention briefly, we do like to say, when possible, avoid fluorescent lights, and it's not so much related to the color spectrum as they can buzz, and sometimes we can hear those buzzes, but there can be buzzes that humans don't hear that are affecting particularly cats, but also lots of other animals too. And so fluorescent lights can be problematic in that regard. With regard to scents, I think it all comes down to control / predictability. So I think scent can be a valuable add-on to stress mitigation or enrichment opportunities. Ooh, this is interesting. I'm smelling lavender now. I'm smelling mint. But we definitely want to be cognizant of people knowing, people and animals as much as possible. That's where that predictability comes in. Okay, today we're having scent enrichment, or I'm going to walk into this space and check out these different scents in this room, in these boxes that are set out for me to sniff if I'm a dog. But definitely can be a good source of enrichment for animals for sure. As long as they, again, have opportunities to control it by moving away if they need to. If it's not a scent they like, then it can be a really great opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So the next question that we have is, existing emergency shelters have often shoehorned themselves into pre-existing spaces that were never meant to be congregate shelters for people, and they definitely do not take animal design into consideration. Many of the co-sheltering facilities featured during the conference have beautiful amenities like dog runs and outdoor kennels. In dense urban areas, sometimes it's not possible to create those amenities due to a lack of space. What might you recommend in lieu of an outdoor dog run or an outdoor kennel in a tight indoor location?
I can start. I think that no matter what you're starting from, we have a spectrum of like ritzy to not ritzy potentially, right? If we're starting on the not so ritzy side of the spectrum, we're shoehorning into a pre-existing facility, there's always the opportunity to move in the direction of better, right? We may not be able to get all the way to the other end, but there's plenty of opportunities to make small tweaks in a lot of different ways that can add up to make a big difference. I'm imagining in an urban environment where having a lot of outside amenities isn't going to be easy or is going to be cost prohibitive. Having opportunities from the animal perspective and the people connected to those animals, having opportunities for animals to get ample physical and mental exercise. So enrichment, and exercise, right? So you might need to have a larger room where there's a timeshare or a dog play group time or something where the dogs can go and get their squiggles out, and the people can go and toss the ball around the room where they're not going to break things and they can just kind of burn some energy. Other animals too are going to need those opportunities to experience novel things that feel safe and stimulating. And also get them some exercise. And so there are also things like, I'm imagining even in an urban environment, you could set up like a screened in porch potentially, and take turns, and people can go out there with their cat, with their gerbil. We're just going to stick with gerbils as the alternative pet here, with their dog if they're taking turns. And so that's an opportunity to get outside and get some of that natural experience, that sunlight when relevant. And I see that we lost Dr. Pable, so I guess we move on for now.
Yeah, okay,
Unless
yeah.
There's a part B there.
Yeah, we have tech working on that. So
Yeah,
hopefully
no
she
problem.
will be able to jump back in. So I am going to move on to the next question then. Co-sheltering programs can sometimes have multiple families with different species of pets entering the shelter. Dogs of all sizes, cats, birds, turtles. What design recommendations do you have to make sure that everyone stays safe and avoids animal mishaps?
Yes. Well, with a question like this, my mind always wants to start with things that aren't necessarily design elements. So I did share in the first session a picture of one of my cats and my dog, and they're sitting very close to each other and they look like they like each other and they don't. It's a lie. they're lifelong enemies. And so if I had found myself in a situation of needing to enter a co-sheltering facility, being required to keep that cat in proximity to that dog would not be good for the cat. The dog wouldn't care, she'd roll with it, but the cat would be very stressed. So design elements that would help with that include having a variety of confinement options or housing units potentially available, and having housing units that can be moved around and set up in different spaces. So we talked about getting cage banks that are on wheels. And so if they're small enough, they could be set in proximity to a person's living area. But if needed, they could also be moved to the perimeter of the larger space. Or if you have a ward where cats or dogs are going to be spending time, you could wheel the housing units into those spaces if they need a little bit more quiet out of the hubbub of the day-to-day life. Other design elements are how you're gonna, architects have a fancy word for this, and I bet Jill would know it too. I don't know the word, but wayfinding. You wanna design your facility so that the movement, the flow of people is gonna happen in a way that's not disruptive to the people who are already in a space, that isn't gonna contribute to noise, unpredictability, and things like that. And so thinking about how people are gonna get from point A to point B within the space, and setting up different opportunities to move people and animals through the facility is an important element for that as well. Those are the main things that come to mind for me. Oh, Shoshana, you're muted.
Thank you. So we have Jill back. So I'm actually going to re-ask that question just to see if Jill has anything she wants to add. And then if she doesn't, then we'll move on. So Jill, the question that you missed was, co-sheltering programs can sometimes have multiple families with different species of pets entering the shelter, dogs of all sizes, cats, birds, turtles. What design recommendations do you have to make sure that everyone stays safe and avoids mishaps?
Oh boy. Well, Becky, if she's already addressed this, I'm sure she has some terrific ideas. From my point of view, which is more along the lines of human interactions, I would say that there's actually precedent for this for people in different sort of mental places as well. For example, I just worked on a shelter with a terrific architectural design team where they ended up creating 3 different neighborhoods. One neighborhood for women, one neighborhood for women with children, and one neighborhood for women who were experiencing mental distress. So I would probably say the same thing if we're talking about now bringing in companion animals into the mix, that when we consider acoustics, when we consider perhaps even unknown ways companion animals recognize that they are around others, I think we're probably faced with the idea we need to have different sorts of animals in different sections of the space. And I would also say it would probably be a good idea to think of, how we provide, animals and their humans with spaces to roam, if you will. We kind of think of it as a layered approach where we might have a room where, those only dogs are allowed with their companion animals, but also we might think of pods within the room that would give everybody another layer of, control and privacy in order to try to control acoustics and just to simply keep both humans and animals in a calm state. Because we put a lot of stock into visual privacy. Visual sight lines is a big part of awareness of others being around, both for humans and I would imagine for animals as well. So it's kind of thinking about various layers of security in a space. I think the same might be said of, maintaining and minimizing those conflicts as much as possible.
No, that makes so much sense. I'm wanting to, and you guys might have touched on this again on day one, but I kind of want to bump back to something that Becky said that made me kind of laugh a little bit, because you were talking about your dog and your cat being face to face, right? And how that they actually are not super comfortable, at least your cat. I think it's interesting that a lot of people who are going to be in the shelter, they know their own pets, but they might not know that much about reading other animals' body language or what's going on with pets that they don't know. And so was that discussed at all on day one about how to train people who are living in those shelters to perhaps have some more knowledge about body language or respect for other people's animals that they don't know, to not just, I mean, I know so many people who are like, oh, their dogs are fine, and kind of don't really recognize what's actually going on.
Yes, it came up briefly and in a really important way. And Kirsten Jewell, who was one of the folks representing the folks from the Kitsap facility, was thinking about, well, maybe you have sort of color-coded leashes or collars or something, and if a certain pet isn't coping well, or the way that they are coping is through an aggressive behavior when approached or something, maybe there's certain colors that mean give me space. So the colors can go on to mean things. And then with Jill's pods idea, you can also have signage potentially that could sort of define what's happening for an animal or a person at any given time. And it can change, right? Today I'm feeling like I don't want any other dogs near me, but maybe tomorrow I'll be feeling a little bit better about the situation or something like that. And the other thing I wanted to comment on briefly is I've worked in animal shelters where most often the animals I'm working with aren't attached to their people. They've been separated from their people. So I'm seeing them with that bond sort of already disrupted. But I would anticipate that in a co-sheltering facility that a lot of these pets are going to behave in ways that are even going to be unexpected to their families because of the trauma and the stress that they've experienced, them being placed in a new environment, being uprooted from what they're familiar with. Animals can start to express behaviors that even their own families are not going to anticipate. And so, yes, just being prepared to kind of recognize what is actually happening in front of us and act accordingly, and recognize that it can be fluid and change as people and animals acclimate, but keeping everybody safe and setting them up in a way that promotes them coping and acclimating as successfully as possible is what's key.
Definitely. I love that you mentioned that that's fluid, because that's so true. What one day a dog could be acting one way, and then once they settle in, it could change, or depending on what the stimulus around them that they're reacting to. So yeah, I love that you mentioned that. For programs that want to start taking pets but have little to no budget for making modifications, what are some easy steps that they can take with design to make sure that everyone remains safe and comfortable?
That's a good one.
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind, I like that word that you just used, Jill, the neighborhoods. I like the idea of having neighborhoods. And I think a lot of the design is going to kind of come from all of the sort of programmatic and plans that you think about in advance of having those animals arriving with their people. And the design will flow out of that. And so you'll need to think about who your partners are going to be if there is an advanced medical need for a pet while someone is staying in your facility, or there is a behavioral challenge that we need some support for. You're going to need to set up those partnerships in advance. And having flexible opportunities for where an animal will spend its time at different points in time, if their owner's there versus owner's not there, if they're behaving a certain way versus a different way. Just being prepared to be as flexible as possible and setting up what you're investing your limited energy and resources in to allow that to the greatest extent possible.
I would add to that, even if you don't have funds to move walls and so forth, see if there's things you can do to minimize the effect of pinched places or crowding. Sometimes you have the ability to move beds, maybe move partial walls to create pods or neighborhoods, or you can maybe set up some guidelines as to who can access certain spaces at certain times or certain days to kind of minimize those happenstance encounters, which may not go well. So, I think time is also a design element that we can manipulate here to advantage sometimes. So one thing we talked about in the last session was the reception space happened to be fairly tight in its square footage. And that's going to be a space where, clients are coming in with their animals, all different kinds of animals. They're going to be lingering there in order to get checked in. Staff are going to be there. It's going to be an active, audio, loud sort of situation. So if that could be eased in terms of how big a space is, yeah, Becky's got it up on the screen there. Or if we can kind of keep the sleeping spaces separate from, a main passerby sort of corridor. And even if it's not walls, that could be curtains, that could be panels that are freestanding. Those are all things that I think can help with the whole acoustic and sightline thing we've been talking about too.
That's a great idea. I love it. So one of the other questions is, there seems to be some debate about the height of fences in dog parks. What is your recommendation? We've worked with a shelter that constructed a dog park, and they erected a very tall chain link fence, which seemed safe, but it was very, very ugly.
I don't have a height number off the top of my head. I feel that there's probably going to need to be some guideposts around the dogs spending time outside. They should be supervised. And as someone who does take my dog to the dog park, and they don't have very tall fences at the ones I go to, most of the time the dogs stay in the space where their people are and the fun dogs are, because that's where they want to be. In shelter situations, when we've had dogs who are fence escapers, I don't know that the height of the fence actually keeps them from escaping. They're going to climb a fence no matter what the height is. They're going to try anyway. So I don't know that there is an absolute number. There's going to be dogs who will be able to get over a fence, but I don't know, especially in these situations where you're trying to decide where to put your resources. Everybody's got limitations, right? I don't know that going for a super tall fence is a necessary investment. I think a reasonable 4 to 6 foot fence is going to get the job done most of the time. And hopefully families are going to be aware if they have a pet that's inclined to scale a fence or move past a fence to go chase something or just go sniff. And those dogs can stay on leashes or have very close supervision. Great question.
Yeah, thank you. Great answer. One other question that we have was about communal spaces. So do you know if any United States shelters have implemented communal spaces such as community fire pits? Communal cooking over fire and just general gathering around a fire is so important to this person's cultural background. So they're wondering if you have any input about communal spaces.
I have some thoughts on that. One of my colleagues and I have actually done some research to look at the nature and importance of community spaces within supported housing. And in a nutshell, it's very important. And also the design of it is very important. If it's placed in a way that people can see it, can have those impromptu passerby conversations that can bring people into a sense of discussion and community, they are more successful than if such spaces are sequestered, way in the corner or behind, 3 doors that we don't see them very much. It's interesting. Just yesterday, I finished an article for a newsletter that talks about the devastating problem of loneliness, and it affects a huge percentage of people of all ages, especially here in the United States. And the pandemic has made it worse. It's so bad that the United Kingdom has a minister of loneliness, and it's not just feeling sad when you're lonely. It's literally connections to suicide, depression, diabetes, high blood pressure, and so forth, that can be attended to this if it's pervasive and long lasting enough. So, anything we can do with our architecture to bring people back into a conversation in a way that's manageable, especially when companion animals are involved, is a pretty valuable thing to do. I've also seen in my own work clients who have been living on the streets for literally 5 to 10 years even though they're living right next to a shelter, they won't come to the shelter to stay because they fear they're going to lose their sense of community. So that's a huge thing. We as shelter providers need to find a solution on and communicate that solution effectively to get people to come in and access our services and find a way out of their situation. So I'm a huge fan of community spaces in whatever form that takes, whether it's a community garden, whether it's a fire pit, whether it's a shared kitchen, whether it's a billiard table, or in the case of adolescents, whether it's, gathering around gaming. So it takes a lot of different forms, and I'm a huge fan.
Wonderful. So back to dog parks, the same human shelter that built the dog park with the tall fence. The dog park was pretty tiny because of a lack of outdoor space. They wanted to put a jump through in the middle. They wanted to put a jump through in the park, which they ultimately took out of the design. But then it was just a piece of bare dirt encircled by a tall fence. With limited space, what features should you add to a dog park?
Well, I guess my initial reaction is that just getting outside and encountering new smells, new sounds, new sights, and there's going to be dogs coming and going. So there's always going to be fresh smells, probably. That's all going to be very enriching for dogs getting out there. So you don't necessarily need furniture. If the space is at least big enough to allow tossing of tennis balls, at least a little ways, setting out a little plastic swimming pool, playing tug, setting out a chair and just maybe having a shade where a person and a dog could just lay down and hang out together. I don't know that you need sort of active equipment for it to be a really great experience for the dogs. The humans might find it kind of boring and unpleasant aesthetically, and I fully acknowledge that, but I think there's a lot that could still happen in that space that's going to be beneficial to the animals and the people that are connected to them.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. So someone's asked what strategies that you have for training staff at locations that haven't historically allowed animals.
Speaking for myself, I don't think that's something that I can speak to. Jill, I'll let you go, and then I can sort of try to throw out something maybe potentially useful.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me too. When I come in to work or assist on a project, I usually come in alongside the architect and designer, sort of a user experience consultant. And also at that design table, by absolute necessity, is the support organization that is bringing, their policies and also, their approach to staff and its training to the table. So yeah, I think that's a little bit out of my court too.
Yeah, just bringing my perspective from animal shelters. I mean, animal shelters are trying to bring in folks to help run the shelter in a volunteer status, right? And there's a training element to that. And so I think animal welfare agencies can be a really important ally to filling in the gaps in knowledge and comfort that the folks running the co-sheltering facility might have. And then just being prepared to sort of create an environment where people feel comfortable saying, well, here's what I feel comfortable with. And if we cross this line, I am out of my element, I am uncomfortable. And here's where we need to say that we need a partner from beyond our own organization to step in, to assist, to train, to provide a service that's just going to be beyond our own capacity to manage.
One thing I would add too, and this is often forgotten in the programming of a new or a renovated space, is that staff are under tremendous stress. This is stressful work that, takes its toll on them. So, instead of just thinking we need to only help the clients and the companion animals, we also need to provide respite spaces for staff. They need to have a place to step away. They need a place for that training. They need a place just to take a moment within the architecture confines of that location where they're working too.
Thank you, Jill. That's never said enough. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
No, I was about to say the same thing. Like, I love hearing that. That's such an important reminder. Thank you. I'm going to read a couple things from the chat that people had added. One person had talked about pairing with nearby sniff spots as a great resource. And so I just wanted to mention that. And then I think it was the same person, it looks like, I had also mentioned, I think in relation to the fences, coyote rollers or a lean in at the top of a fence can be made easily and affordable. So I just wanted to mention that. And then there was another comment regarding the communal space. That just said that hospitals are implementing community hearths. And I saw a comment on one that was like, if we can inherently implement chapels into our hospital, then we can implement things like community fires for Indigenous peoples. So I just thought that that was an interesting comment that I wanted to share from our chat. And I'm sorry if I've missed other comments in there. And so now we're honestly getting towards the end of our time. That went really fast, I think, for me. Is there anything just in closing that you'd like to add, regarding this wonderful opportunity of adding animals to shelter space?
Well, one thing I would just like to say is thank you for everybody's interest and passion for this topic. Not only, I think, is it absolutely necessary for, the health of our companion animals, which offers so much, but also, I've found tragically so often people will not come in to seek services if their companion animals, of course, are not accommodated. So this is an obvious and next step. There is so much work that needs to be done in this area. I'm personally interested in, trying to conduct some research to further this. If you're interested in, partnering on that, I would love to hear from you. My email is designedforhomelessness@gmail.com. And I would love to, have that conversation. Thanks.
I opened the wrong page. I was just going to share. Can people see a list of emails and web addresses? Yes. Okay. Yes, emails are here. Websites that we're affiliated with are here. Oops. Contact info for Kirsten and Judy Ray as well, who were at our first session. Jill's got a wonderful book. There's a fantastic set of guidelines that you can find online for emergency co-sheltering. If you haven't yet encountered it, go looking for that. But thank you. I'm going to echo what Jill said. Thank you all for the heart and the work you're doing. And it's so exciting to have the opportunity to join this community and see what kind of opportunities for learning and improving that we're just on the cusp of right now. So it's just a really great time. So thank you all for the work that you're doing to contribute to that.
Thank you. So yeah, now we're at time for our office hour session. So I'd like to thank Jill and Becky for joining us and for sharing your expertise, not once, but twice during this conference. So we were lucky to have you twice.